What would you do if you found your children huddled together in one bed, crying because of your fights with your spouse? This is the story of a father who had to choose between his pride and his family. If you like the story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's begin. The sound of muffled crying pierced through the quiet of the night. John froze in the doorway of his children's bedroom, gripping the frame with trembling fingers. The dim glow of a nightlight illuminated a scene that broke his heart. 12-year-old Liam lay protectively curled around his younger siblings, 8-year-old Noah and 6-year-old Ella, on a bed meant for one. Their small faces bore traces of tears, and even in sleep, Liam's brow was furrowed, carrying a burden no child should bear. Beside them lay a notebook, its pages open to Ella's latest drawing, a family portrait of stick figures, but with a heavy line cutting through the middle, separating Mom and Dad. John's chest tightened. The weight of the day pressed harder against him. He and Sarah had argued again, another fight that spiraled out of control, its echoes leaving scars on the walls of their home and in their children's hearts. "I'm not apologizing for working late, John," Sarah had snapped earlier, slamming her laptop shut. "Why don't you try supporting me for once instead of acting like I'm the problem?" His voice had been no kinder. "Supporting you? I'm carrying this family while you play career woman. You're never here." Her face had fallen, a flicker of pain in her eyes quickly masked by anger. "You're not the man I married," she'd shot back. "And you're not the woman I thought you'd be," he had replied coldly before storming out of the room. Hours later, as he stood in the dark hallway watching his children sleep, shame clawed at him. What had they become? Their love, once the bedrock of their family, had turned toxic, poisoning everything it touched. He closed his eyes, replaying the look on Ella's face when she had seen them fighting. Wide-eyed terror, her small hands clutching her crayon tightly as she fled the room. Tomorrow, he had an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Everyone around him had encouraged it. His friends said it was time to take control. His family claimed Sarah didn't respect him. But as he stood in the doorway of his children's room, watching them huddled together for comfort, John felt something shift deep within him. Was his pride worth the cost? Was being right worth tearing apart the fragile world of the three little people who looked to him for safety and love? The next morning, John awoke to the sound of hushed sobs coming from the kitchen. He found Ella sitting at the table, her sketchbook open before her. She was using black crayon to fill in a shadowed figure between two houses. "Ella, sweetheart," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Liam said if you and Mama get a divorce, we'll have to live in different houses. Is that true, Papa?" John's heart twisted painfully. Why would Liam say that? "Because Omar told us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He said kids have to choose when their parents stop loving each other. But I don't want to choose." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I want us to stay in one house." For a moment, John couldn't speak. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Ella, you don't need to worry about that," he murmured, though his own doubts were screaming in his head. "Mama and I love you very much. All of you." She nodded against his chest, but her grip on his shirt didn't loosen. When she finally returned to her brothers, John stayed in the kitchen, staring blankly at the drawing she had left behind. Later that afternoon, John and Sarah sat across from Liam's teacher in the crowded parent-teacher conference room. Mrs. Reynolds, a kind-looking woman in her early 50s, wore a concerned expression. "I wanted to meet with both of you because I've noticed some changes in Liam recently," she began. "His grades have been slipping, and he seems distracted in class. Yesterday, I found him alone in the library during lunch. He was crying." John glanced at Sarah, whose expression wavered between guilt and sorrow. "Did he say why?" Sarah asked quietly. Mrs. Reynolds hesitated. "He mentioned being worried about his younger siblings. He feels responsible for protecting them, at home." John's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, to insist they were good parents, but the words wouldn't come. He thought of Liam's hunched shoulders, his nervous glances whenever John and Sarah exchanged words. When they left the school, Sarah stopped in the parking lot, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "What are we doing, John?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "To them?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. That night, John paced the backyard, unable to sleep. His lawyer's words echoed in his mind. A clean break is often best for everyone. But was it? He glanced up at the house where the light in Liam's room was still on. His son was probably reading again, distracting himself from the storm brewing between his parents. When had things become so broken? In the beginning, he had loved Sarah's ambition, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her architectural designs. She was strong, independent, and brilliant, all the things that had drawn him to her. But as the years passed and the demands of work and family collided, those qualities began to feel like obstacles instead of blessings. The first real crack had come 3 years ago, when Sarah received her big promotion. Late nights at the office, client meetings, and business trips clashed with their family routines. His mother's words had added fuel to the fire. "A good wife knows her place," she had said during one of her visits. "Sarah's always running off to work. What about the children?" John had dismissed the comments at first, but over time, resentment began to build. It didn't help that Sarah's colleagues often praised her for her modern independence, while his friends told him he was too soft for letting her put her career first. "Why can't you just be here?" he had asked her once during yet another argument. Her reply still stung. "Because I'm trying to build something for all of us. Isn't that what partners do?" The following morning, John woke up early, his mind restless and cluttered. His appointment with the divorce lawyer loomed, but something about Ella's words kept tugging at him. He walked into the kitchen to find Sarah already there, sipping coffee with dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was deafening, filled with the weight of things unsaid. John poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, glancing at her. She looked tired. More than tired. Worn out. "We need to talk about Liam," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. "I know," John replied. "I spoke to Ella yesterday too. She's scared, Sarah. They all are." Sarah's grip on her coffee mug tightened. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry for working too much? That I should quit my job and—" "I didn't say that," John interrupted, trying to keep his voice steady. "But maybe we need to think about what we're doing. To them." Her eyes flashed with a mix of frustration and guilt. "Don't put this all on me, John. You think I don't see how you've checked out? You come home late, you don't talk to me unless it's about bills or schedules. I'm not the only one who's distant." John opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. She wasn't wrong. He had distanced himself, retreating into work and the gym as a way to escape the constant tension. He set his coffee down and sighed. "I'm not blaming you. I'm saying we both need to take responsibility." Sarah stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like she wanted to say something, but instead, she just nodded and walked out of the room. Later that day, John found himself in his car, parked outside the law office. The building loomed before him, its glass doors reflecting his conflicted face. He sat there for a long time, the lawyer's business card clutched in his hand. When he finally stepped out of the car, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Liam doesn't want to go to school today. He says he feels sick, but I think he's just scared." John stared at the message, his chest tightening. He slid back into the driver's seat and dialed the lawyer's number. "This is John Carter," he said when the receptionist answered. I need to cancel my appointment." That evening, the house was unusually quiet. Liam was in his room reading, while Noah and Ella played a board game on the living room floor. John found Sarah in the kitchen staring out the window as she washed dishes. The tension between them was palpable, but John knew they couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. "I canceled my appointment," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Sarah turned to look at him, her hands still wet. "What?" "The lawyer," John said. "I canceled it. I don't want to rush into something that's going to hurt the kids even more." Sarah blinked, her expression softening for a moment before her defenses returned. "So, what do you want to do? Pretend everything's fine? We've tried fixing this before, John, and it didn't work." "I know," he admitted, "but we haven't really tried. Not for them." Sarah's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in months, John saw the vulnerability she had been hiding. "I don't know if I have it in me, John. I'm so tired." "I am, too," he said softly. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we need to stop trying to do this alone." The next week was awkward. Both John and Sarah made small efforts, tiny gestures that seemed insignificant but didn't go unnoticed. John started coming home earlier from work, helping the kids with their homework while Sarah finished her projects. Sarah, in turn, began leaving little notes for him in the kitchen, reminding him to eat lunch or thanking him for handling the kids. Liam, however, remained distant. One evening, as John sat with him in his room, he tried to bridge the gap. "Liam," he said gently, "can we talk?" Liam didn't look up from his book. "About what?" "About how you're feeling," John said. "I know things have been hard lately. I just want you to know that your mom and I are trying to make it better." Liam finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Are you going to get divorced?" John hesitated. "We're not sure yet," he admitted, "but we're going to try to fix things. For you, Noah, and Ella." Liam nodded slowly, but his expression remained guarded. "I just want us to be like we used to." "So do I," John said. "We'll get there." The days that followed were filled with an uneasy truce between John and Sarah. Small gestures like passing dishes at dinner or sharing a rare moment of laughter over something one of the kids said began to chip away at the walls between them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, Sarah came home earlier than usual, a tired smile tugging at her lips. She found John in the living room, helping Noah with a science project while Ella and Liam painted at the dining table. The scene was almost too normal, too peaceful, and for a moment she hesitated in the doorway, unsure of how to join them. John noticed her first. "Hey," he said, his tone warmer than it had been in weeks. "You're home early." Sarah nodded, stepping inside. "I figured I could finish my work later. It's nice to see everyone. Like this." Ella immediately jumped up, running to show Sarah her latest drawing. "Look, Mama, it's all of us at the park. Even you and Papa are smiling." The picture was simple but poignant, their family standing together under a bright sun, hands linked. Sarah's throat tightened as she took the drawing from Ella. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. "Will we go to the park again soon?" Ella asked, her wide eyes full of hope. John and Sarah exchanged a glance. It was a small moment, but it carried the weight of 1,000 conversations left unsaid. "Yes," Sarah said finally, her voice steady. "We'll go this weekend." Later that night, as the kids slept, John sat on the balcony with Sarah. It was the first time in months they had shared a moment alone that didn't devolve into an argument. The quiet hum of the city filled the space between them, but it wasn't suffocating this time. It was almost comforting. "I've been thinking," John said, breaking the silence, "about how we got here." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She stared out at the city lights, her expression thoughtful. "Do you remember our 3rd anniversary?" she asked suddenly. "I had that big client meeting and your parents had planned dinner." John winced at the memory. "Yeah, I told you work shouldn't come before family." Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "That night, I felt like I had to choose between being a good wife and being myself." "I didn't mean to make you feel like that," John said softly. He paused, struggling to find the words. "I didn't know how to handle feeling left out." Sarah's expression softened, and for the first time she reached out, placing her hand over his. "I think we both stopped listening to each other. Somewhere along the way, it became about winning arguments instead of understanding. John nodded, his thumb brushing against her fingers. I don't want to keep doing that. Not for us, not for the kids. Neither do I, Sarah admitted. But it's not going to be easy, John. I know, he said, but I'm willing to try. Over the next few weeks, the Carter family began to heal in small, hesitant steps. John made an effort to be home earlier, and Sarah started sharing more about her day. They planned family outings, like a trip to the park where the kids played while John and Sarah sat on a bench, watching them with a sense of cautious hope. But the process wasn't without its setbacks. One evening, during a rare dinner with John's parents, his mother couldn't help but comment on Sarah's work hours. Children need their mother at home, she said pointedly, not running around chasing deadlines. John tensed, expecting Sarah to snap back, but before she could, he spoke up. Actually, Mom, Sarah's doing an amazing job balancing everything. The kids have a great role model because of her. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at him, her expression a mixture of shock and gratitude. His mother muttered something under her breath but didn't push the issue further. Later that night, Sarah found John in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of water. You didn't have to defend me, she said, her voice quiet. Yes, I did, he replied. You deserve it. Something in her softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled at him. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real, and it warmed to something inside him that he thought had long gone cold. One evening, as John helped Liam with a school project, the boy finally opened up. You and Mom. You seem better, he said cautiously. We're trying, John replied. We're not perfect, but we're trying. Liam nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. It's just, I was scared that you'd leave. John's heart ached at the vulnerability in his son's voice. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. Neither is your mom. We're going to figure this out together as a family. Liam didn't say anything, but the tension in his shoulders eased, and for the first time in months he hugged his father tightly. The breakthrough came on a rainy Friday evening. The family was gathered in the living room, watching old home videos. The screen flickered with moments from their past, birthdays, vacations, and, finally, their wedding. The younger versions of John and Sarah looked so happy, so full of hope. As their wedding vows played, Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. John glanced at her, his own emotions threatening to spill over. We meant those words, he said quietly. We just forgot them for a while. Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Maybe it's time we remember. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship from the ground up? What helped you push past the hurt and try again? Share your story in the comments below. It might inspire someone who needs to hear it. The rain poured relentlessly the following Tuesday evening, drumming against the windows as the Carter family sat around the dining table. Dinner was quieter than usual, the usual banter replaced by thoughtful glances and occasional murmurs. Liam had just shared that his teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, had praised his improved focus in class. That's great, buddy, John said, ruffling his son's hair. I'm proud of you. Sarah nodded in agreement. You've been working really hard, Liam. It shows. Liam gave a small smile but stayed quiet, his attention on his plate. John and Sarah exchanged a glance, understanding that trust, like wounds, took time to heal. Papa, Ella said suddenly, breaking the silence, are you coming to the father-daughter dance at my school? John froze, the question catching him off guard. The dance, he had completely forgotten about it. The event was scheduled for the same evening as a major work meeting he couldn't easily reschedule. Of course he'll be there, Sarah interjected gently, sensing his hesitation. Right, John? John looked at Ella, her wide eyes filled with hope, and nodded. I wouldn't miss it for the world. That night, John sat in his home office staring at his work calendar. His chest tightened as he thought about the meeting. It was an important project, one that could potentially secure him a promotion he'd been chasing for months. But then his thoughts drifted to Ella's face, her quiet plea lingering in his mind. Across the room, Sarah knocked softly before entering. She had a habit of doing that now, as though testing the waters before stepping into his space. "You're thinking about work, aren't you?" she asked, her tone neutral. John sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know how to balance this. If I skip the meeting, it might affect my chances for a promotion. But if I miss the dance..." Sarah sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. "I know how much that promotion means to you," she said carefully, "but Ella, she's been through so much. This dance is important to her." John leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "What if I can't be both? Good at work and good at home?" "You can," Sarah said firmly. "You just have to decide what matters most moment by moment, and right now, Ella needs you." Her words struck something deep within him. For years he had believed in an all-or-nothing approach to life. Either he succeeded at work, or he succeeded as a father. But perhaps Sarah was right. Perhaps balance wasn't about perfection, but about showing up where it mattered most. On the evening of the dance, John stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Ella burst into the room, her face glowing with excitement as she twirled in her light blue dress. "How do I look, Papa?" she asked, her eyes shining. John crouched to her level, smiling. "You look like a princess." "Are you nervous about dancing?" she asked, giggling. "Terrified," John admitted with a laugh, "but I'll follow your lead." As they arrived at the school, John noticed how Ella's smile widened when they entered the decorated gymnasium. She waved excitedly to her friends who were there with their fathers. For the first time in weeks, John felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Meanwhile, Sarah was at home, wrapping up a presentation she had rescheduled to ensure she could be with the boys that evening. As she packed up her laptop, she stumbled upon John's journal, left open on the desk. She hesitated, unsure if she should read it, but the words caught her eye. "Today, I promised Ella I'd be at her dance. I want to be there for her, but I'm scared. Scared that I'll keep failing them. Scared that no matter how hard I try, it won't be enough to fix what's broken." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she read further, seeing John's raw, unfiltered thoughts. He wrote about his struggles with pride, his guilt over their fights, and his desire to be a better father and husband. "I'm trying to remember why we started this journey together. I'm trying to see her the way I did when we exchanged vows, to understand her dreams instead of feeling threatened by them." Sarah closed the journal, her heart heavy yet full. She hadn't realized just how deeply John was struggling, or how much he was fighting to hold their family together. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. When John and Ella returned home later that evening, her face was flushed with joy. "Mama, Papa danced with me," she exclaimed, running to show Sarah the small bracelet she had made during the event. As Ella dashed off to join her brothers, John and Sarah stood in the doorway, their eyes meeting. "She had a great time," John said quietly. "I can tell," Sarah replied, her voice soft. "Thank you for being there for her." John nodded, sensing the shift in her tone. It's what she needed, what they all need. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then reached out to touch his arm. "It's what I need too," she admitted. "Thank you for trying." The next morning, John woke up to the smell of coffee wafting through the house. He walked into the kitchen to find Sarah standing by the counter, 2 mugs in her hands. She looked up as he entered, a small, tentative smile playing on her lips. "Good morning," she said, sliding one of the mugs toward him. "Thought you could use this." John blinked, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks," he said, taking the mug. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted, leaning against the counter. "I was thinking about everything." He nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. For once, the silence between them wasn't tense. It was reflective, like the calm after a storm. "I read your journal," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. John froze, the mug halfway to his lips. "You... what?" "I know I shouldn't have," she continued quickly, "but I'm glad I did. I didn't realize how much you've been carrying, how much you've been trying." John set the mug down, his chest tightening. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think I was weak." "John," Sarah said, stepping closer, "trying to fix what's broken doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave." Her words hit him like a wave, and for a moment he couldn't speak. When he finally found his voice, it was laced with emotion. "I just want us to be okay again, Sarah. I want the kids to have the family they deserve." "So do I," she said, her voice breaking. "But we have to stop trying to do it alone. We have to start listening to each other again." John nodded, the weight on his shoulders lifting slightly. For the first time in months, he felt like they were on the same page. Over the next few weeks, the changes in their household became more apparent. Laughter, once a rare sound, began to echo through the walls again. The children noticed the shift, too. Ella drew pictures of the family holding hands. Noah stopped chewing his nails, and Liam seemed more at ease. John and Sarah found themselves rediscovering the things that had drawn them together in the first place. On one quiet evening, as they sat on the couch watching the kids play, John turned to Sarah. "Do you remember our first date?" he asked, a hint of a smile on his face. Sarah chuckled. "How could I forget? You spilled coffee all over yourself trying to impress me." John laughed, shaking his head. "And you still said yes to a second date. I've never figured out why." "Because," Sarah said, looking at him, "you made me laugh, and you cared about what I had to say. You listened." Her words struck a chord, and John realized how far they had drifted from that simple foundation. "I want to be that guy again," he said, "the one who listens." Sarah reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "And I want to be the person who trusts." The real test of their renewed efforts came during a family trip to the park one sunny Saturday. It was the first outing they had planned as a family in months. The children ran ahead, their laughter filling the air, while John and Sarah followed at a slower pace. "Do you think we're doing enough?" John asked, glancing at Sarah. "For them?" "We're trying," she replied, "and they can see that. That's what matters." They reached a bench near the playground, sitting side by side as they watched the kids play. For a long time, neither of them spoke, content to simply be in the moment. "Thank you," Sarah said finally, her voice soft. "For what?" John asked. "For not giving up," she said, her eyes meeting his, even when it felt impossible. John's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from hope. "We're in this together," he said, "no matter what." That evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere felt lighter than it had in months. The children shared stories from the park, their faces alight with joy. John and Sarah exchanged smiles, their connection slowly but surely mending. When dinner was over, Liam surprised them both by asking, "Can we watch the wedding video again?" John and Sarah froze, their eyes meeting across the table. It was a request they hadn't expected, but they could see the curiosity and hope in their children's faces. "Sure," Sarah said after a moment, her voice steady. "Let's watch it together." They gathered in the living room, the old DVD player whirring to life. As the video played, their younger selves appeared on the screen, full of love and promise. The children laughed at their parents' awkward dance moves, while John and Sarah sat quietly, their hands brushing but not pulling away. When the vows began to play, Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. John glanced at her, feeling a lump in his throat as he listened to his own voice from years ago. "I choose you, not just for today, but for all the tomorrows we'll share," his younger self said. "In good times and bad, I promise to always stand by your side." The words hung in the air, a reminder of the commitment they had made and the journey they were still on. As the days turned into weeks, the Carter household slowly began to feel like a home again. The arguments that once echoed through its walls were replaced with laughter, shared meals, and the occasional awkward but heartfelt conversations between John and Sarah. The children's faces grew brighter, their worries melting away like snow in the sun. But healing was never a straight path, and both John and Sarah knew it. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings, and old habits threatening to resurface. One such moment came on a Friday evening when John returned home later than expected. "Work ran late," he said quickly as he walked through the door, his tone apologetic. Sarah, who had been waiting to discuss an issue Liam was facing at school, sighed heavily. "You could have at least texted." "I've been trying to manage dinner, the kids, and everything else by myself." John's shoulders tensed. "I didn't mean to keep you waiting, Sarah. I was stuck in a meeting." "Every time you say that, it feels like you're saying your work is more important than what's happening here," Sarah said, her voice quiet but strained. John wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he stopped. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the same exhaustion he felt. Instead of snapping back, he took a deep breath. "You're right," he said. "I should have let you know. I'm sorry." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his response. She nodded slowly, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you." That night, as they sat together after the children had gone to bed, Sarah spoke softly. "It's not about being perfect, John. I know we'll mess up sometimes. I need to feel like we're in this together." "We are," John said firmly, "and I'll keep showing you that." It was a small exchange, but it felt monumental, a reminder that progress didn't come from grand gestures, but from the daily decision to choose each other over pride or fear. The turning point came during one of Liam's soccer games. John had promised to attend, but an unexpected deadline at work threatened to keep him away. As he sat in his office, staring at the blinking cursor on his screen, his phone buzzed with a photo from Sarah. Liam, dressed in his uniform, smiling nervously. "He's counting on you," the message read. John didn't hesitate. He shut his laptop, grabbed his coat, and rushed out the door. By the time he arrived at the field, the game was already in progress. He spotted Sarah in the stands, waving him over. Liam caught sight of him from the field, and the boy's face lit up. When Liam scored the winning goal, he sprinted to the sidelines, his teammates cheering behind him. "That was for you, Dad," he said breathlessly. John's chest swelled with pride, and as he hugged his son, he realized how much these moments mattered, not just to Liam, but to all of them. That evening, the family celebrated Liam's victory with pizza and a movie. Noah and Ella took turns reenacting the winning goal, much to Liam's embarrassment. John and Sarah exchanged smiles, the kind that spoke of understanding and shared pride. After the kids went to bed, Sarah turned to John. "You're really trying," she said softly. "I am," he replied, "because you're worth it. They're worth it." Sarah's eyes shimmered with emotion, and for the first time in a long while she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared journey slowly lifting. The following weekend, John and Sarah decided to do something they hadn't done in years. They went on a date. With Sarah's best friend Emily watching the kids, they ventured out to the small cafe where they had shared their first date. As they walked through the doors, memories flooded back. John chuckled as he glanced at the corner table where he had spilled coffee on himself years ago. "I can't believe you agreed to a second date after that disaster." Sarah laughed, her eyes sparkling. "It was endearing. Besides, you made me laugh." Over coffee, they talked. Not about bills or schedules, but about their dreams, fears, and the things they had missed about each other. It felt like peeling back layers that had been buried under years of resentment and miscommunication. "I forgot how easy it was to talk to you," Sarah admitted, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "It feels good." John reached across the table, taking her hand. "We can keep doing this, relearning each other, one step at a time." Sarah squeezed his hand, her smile warm. "I'd like that." At home, the children were ecstatic to hear about their parents' date. "Does this mean you're not getting divorced?" Noah asked, his big eyes filled with hope. John knelt to his level, ruffling his hair. "It means we're working really hard to stay together." Ella grinned. "Can we all go on a date next time?" Sarah laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Absolutely." As the weeks passed, John and Sarah continued to rebuild their relationship. They learned to communicate better, to forgive quickly, and to appreciate the small moments that made their family unique. The children flourished under the renewed sense of stability, their laughter filling the house once more. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Liam spoke up. "You know what I noticed?" he said, his tone thoughtful. "The monsters aren't in Ella's drawings anymore." John and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with emotion. "That's because we're fighting them together now," John said. "And winning," Sarah added with a smile. The Carter household had changed in ways that seemed almost imperceptible at first. The once frequent silence had given way to lively conversations, shared laughter, and occasional bouts of chaos that came with raising 3 kids. But it wasn't perfect, and John and Sarah both knew it wouldn't ever be. What mattered was that they were learning to navigate the imperfections together. One evening, John came home from work to find Sarah sitting on the couch with a stack of photo albums. The children were upstairs, their laughter echoing faintly through the house. He hesitated in the doorway, unsure if he should interrupt. "Come here," Sarah said, glancing up and patting the seat next to her. "I was looking through these and I thought you'd want to see." John sat down, and Sarah handed him an album. The first page held pictures from their wedding day. Sarah in her ivory gown, her eyes sparkling with hope. John in his suit, smiling nervously as he held her hand. Each photo seemed to radiate a kind of innocence and joy that felt both familiar and distant. "We look so happy," John murmured. "We were," Sarah said. "And I think we can be again. Not the same, but maybe something better." John turned the page, revealing photos of their first apartment, their first anniversary, and Sarah holding Liam as a baby. "It's funny," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "I always thought these moments were the start of something big, but looking back, they were the big moments." Sarah leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I think the big moments are what we make of them, like right now." The following Saturday, the family gathered in the backyard for a picnic. It was Sarah's idea, a chance to recreate one of their happiest memories and make it something new. The kids were thrilled, running around with a ball while John and Sarah set up the blanket and food. As they sat together, sharing sandwiches and stories, Ella suddenly stood up. "We should take a family picture," she announced. John laughed, pulling out his phone. "All right, everyone, gather around." They huddled together, with Liam and Noah on either side of their parents and Ella in the middle. As John held the phone to take the picture, Sarah leaned into him, her smile brighter than it had been in years. "Say, Carter family forever," Ella shouted. "Carter family forever," they all chorused, laughing as John snapped the photo. Later that evening, as John uploaded the picture to the family computer, he paused to look at it closely. It wasn't perfect. Noah's hair was sticking up and Liam's smile was a little awkward, but it was real. It was them. That night, after the kids were asleep, John and Sarah sat together on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and the cool breeze carried the faint hum of life beyond their home. "I was scared," John admitted, breaking the comfortable silence, "that we'd never find our way back." "So was I," Sarah said softly. "But I think sometimes you have to let go of what you thought things would be to appreciate what they are." John nodded, his hand finding hers. "And I appreciate you, for sticking with me, for believing we could fix this." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I appreciate you too, for trying, for not giving up." For a while they sat in silence, the weight of their journey settling around them like a warm blanket. The monsters that once lurked in the corners of their lives felt far away now, replaced by something steadier, stronger, a commitment to keep choosing each other, no matter what. The next morning, Ella presented them with a new drawing. It showed the family standing together under a rainbow, their hands linked and their faces smiling. "I made this for you and Papa," she said proudly, "because we're all happy now." John and Sarah exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah said, pulling her into a hug. As they hung the drawing on the fridge, John turned to Sarah. "I think we're getting there." Sarah nodded, her smile soft. "One step at a time." Question to you. What do you think it takes to rebuild trust and love in a relationship? Have you experienced a moment where you felt your family or partnership grow stronger? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire someone to hold on a little longer.